As Laura walked into the kitchen, she saw her daughter, Rebecca, sitting at the table, absorbed in her drawing. At first, everything seemed normal. Rebecca often spent hours creating intricate pictures, but this one was different. The paper was filled with dark shapes and shadowed faces that Laura didn't recognize. The room was eerily silent, the only sound the scratch of the crayon against the paper. It wasn't just a drawing, it was a message, a warning. The dark figures seemed to loom, as if they were alive, watching. Rebecca's small hands trembled slightly, but she didn't notice. Laura, however, felt an unsettling chill crawl up her spine. This was not the cheerful, innocent art her daughter usually created. Every line seemed deliberate, ominous. Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but she couldn't pinpoint what it was. The shadows in the picture hinted at something deeper, something lurking just beyond her understanding. She glanced at Rebecca's innocent face, her wide eyes focused on the drawing, and felt a wave of dread she couldn't explain. It was as if the drawing itself was alive, a reflection of something much darker, something that had already begun to creep into their lives. Laura, 35 years old, worked as a nurse at the local hospital. Her life followed a steady routine, the kind that brought comfort but also a sense of monotony. Every morning, she would sip her coffee while preparing breakfast for her daughter, Rebecca. The two of them would share a quiet meal before Rebecca caught the bus to school, and Laura would head to her shift. Evenings were spent the same way: homework, dinner, and the soft hum of television. It was the life of a single mother, filled with small, predictable moments. Rebecca, at 7, was not like other children. She had an unusual talent for drawing, a gift that had always fascinated Laura. Her soft, kind nature was something Laura treasured deeply, and she often marveled at how gentle Rebecca could be, even in her moments of frustration. But today, when Laura came home after a long shift, she found her daughter sitting at the kitchen table, pencil in hand, surrounded by a scattered collection of drawings. Laura stepped closer and saw the picture Rebecca was working on. It was a house, empty, lifeless, and in the window, a face. A dark, hollow face with eyes that seemed too large, too vacant. It was unlike anything Rebecca had ever drawn before. Confusion settled in Laura's chest as she asked what the picture was supposed to be. Rebecca barely glanced up from her work, murmuring that it was just a drawing. But Laura's unease only grew. The face in the window felt wrong. She hadn't noticed anything unusual in their home, but suddenly, everything felt off. It was as though the image Rebecca had created was not just a random drawing, but something more sinister. Something that seemed to warn her of an impending danger she couldn't yet grasp. Laura's heartbeat quickened. There was a shift in the air, a subtle tension. She stood there, staring at the picture, her mind racing. It was too still, too unsettling, and she couldn't shake the sense that something was lurking just beneath the surface of her quiet life. A few days passed, and Laura began to notice a change in Rebecca. The once lively and curious girl had become increasingly withdrawn. She no longer spoke about school or her friends. There was an uncomfortable silence around her that grew every day. Each morning when Laura left Rebecca at home, the girl would sit quietly at the table, drawing the same empty houses over and over. These drawings were unsettling. In the empty windows, there were dark, shadowy figures, strange and unnatural. The figures seemed to watch, to wait, but their eyes were not like those of a person. They were hollow, dark voids, and they sent a chill down Laura's spine. Days passed, and Rebecca's behavior only became more concerning. She no longer showed interest in playing with her old toys or talking about the things she used to enjoy. Laura tried to engage her in conversation, but Rebecca barely responded. It was as though the girl had retreated into herself, leaving only a shell behind. Laura began to feel uneasy. an unexplained sense of dread lurking in the corners of her mind. One afternoon, as Laura was preparing dinner, Rebecca's voice broke the silence. "Mom, I don't want to go to school," she said, her voice small and hesitant. Laura was taken aback. She had expected some resistance, but not like this. Rebecca had always loved school. She was always excited to talk about her day, about her friends, about the little things she learned. But now, all of that had changed. Laura's initial thought was that it might just be a phase or stress from school. But deep down, a gnawing feeling told her it was more than that. That night, as she lay in bed, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had seen the drawings, over and over again, the empty houses with their ominous figures. The house was supposed to be a safe place, a place of warmth and comfort. But now, the walls seemed to close in around her. The more she thought about it, the more the feeling of unease intensified. It wasn't just Rebecca's change in behavior that worried her. It was the sense that something was watching, something that was not supposed to be there. The next morning, Laura decided she couldn't ignore her instincts any longer. She needed to get to the bottom of what was going on with her daughter. She made an appointment with Rebecca's teacher, hoping to get some insight into her behavior at school. When the day of the meeting arrived, Laura sat across from the teacher, her fingers tightly gripping the edge of her chair. The teacher seemed concerned, but was careful not to make any conclusions too quickly. She told Laura that Rebecca had been keeping to herself more and more in recent weeks. The girl was avoiding the other children, spending most of her time alone in the schoolyard. She would sit by herself, drawing on the ground or looking off into the distance, lost in thought. The teacher mentioned that Rebecca's drawings had taken a dark turn. What once were innocent sketches of flowers and animals had evolved into disturbing images of shadowy figures and dark landscapes. Laura listened carefully, her heart sinking with each word. It was as though the pieces were starting to fall into place. But the puzzle was too terrifying to complete. She thanked the teacher and left the meeting, her mind racing with questions. What was happening to Rebecca? Why had she become so distant? And most importantly, what had triggered this sudden change? The next day, Laura decided to have a conversation with Rebecca herself. She approached her daughter gently, trying not to overwhelm her, but the strange distance between them made it hard to connect. She asked Rebecca what exactly it was that bothered her about school. What had changed? Rebecca's response was strange, more unsettling than anything Laura could have anticipated. "I can't explain, Mom," Rebecca said softly, her eyes downcast. "There's someone, they always stand in the corner." Laura froze. She had expected a typical child's complaint, a bad experience with a classmate, perhaps. But this was different. There was fear in Rebecca's voice, a fear that wasn't just about not wanting to go to school. This was something more, something that made Laura's skin crawl. Laura tried to reassure her daughter, but deep down, she knew something was wrong. This wasn't just stress or a phase. This was something else, something darker. She didn't know where to start, but she knew she had to do something. She couldn't let Rebecca slip away into this strange, unsettling silence. That night, as Laura sat in her dimly lit kitchen, her mind churned with questions. The drawing of the empty houses and the figures, they weren't just the result of a troubled imagination. There was something else, something that Laura couldn't quite grasp but felt with every fiber of her being. She had to figure out what was going on. There was no other choice. One evening, Laura noticed that Rebecca was drawing again, but this time without the usual pauses or breaks. The girl was focused, her small hands moving rapidly across the paper. The drawings had become more detailed, more vivid, yet more disturbing. As Laura approached, she froze in place. The image on the paper was haunting, a figure standing beside a house, its eyes empty and its smile grotesque, twisted into something that could never be described as human. There was something unnatural about the way it loomed over the house, as if it were waiting, observing. Rebecca didn't seem to notice her mother's presence at first, too engrossed in her work. Laura watched in silence, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She took a step closer, her voice barely a whisper as she asked, "Rebecca, who is this?" Her question hung in the air, but Rebecca didn't look up. Instead, the girl slowly shook her head, her lips barely moving as she whispered, "He said I should stay quiet." Laura's breath caught in her throat. Her body tensed as a wave of unease washed over her. Who was he? And why had Rebecca said that? What did it mean for her daughter to be so terrified that she had to remain silent? These questions gnawed at Laura, and for the first time she felt a true sense of fear. It was as though Rebecca was no longer just a child drawing pictures. There was something darker at play, something she couldn't yet understand. That night, as Laura lay in bed, her mind raced. She couldn't shake the image of Rebecca's strange words and the disturbing figure in her drawing. She decided, with a sense of quiet resolve, that she needed to keep a closer eye on her daughter. She couldn't let this go on any longer. Laura told herself that she had to find out what was happening, no matter how unsettling it might be. Something was wrong, and she had to uncover the truth. The next few days felt long and tense. Laura tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, but her mind was constantly preoccupied with Rebecca's strange behavior. She began to notice subtle changes in her daughter. Her once lively gaze now seemed distant, her energy diminished, as if she were carrying a weight too heavy for her small shoulders. It wasn't just the drawings anymore, it was everything. Her silence, her reluctance to speak, the way she recoiled at simple questions. One afternoon, Laura noticed that Rebecca had again disappeared into her room. The door was slightly ajar, and the faintest sounds drifted through the crack. Whispers, too soft to understand. Laura's heart quickened, her instincts telling her that something was wrong. She quietly approached, careful not to disturb her daughter. She peered through the gap in the door and saw Rebecca sitting in the darkness, her back to the door, her hands clenched tightly into fists. Rebecca's voice broke the silence, a soft murmur, but it was enough for Laura to hear. "What are you doing?" Laura asked, her voice laced with concern, though she had already known the answer. She could see her daughter's vacant stare, her eyes staring ahead as if lost in another world. "I'm drawing." Rebecca's words were slow, unsure, and the way her eyes remained empty sent a chill through Laura's bones. It was as though Rebecca was there, but not really there, her mind somewhere far beyond the room. At that moment, Laura realized that something far more sinister was at play in their home. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood at the threshold, watching her daughter's strange behavior. The quiet whispers, the empty eyes. It all seemed too much to ignore. Whatever had taken hold of Rebecca, it wasn't something she could explain away. The unease Laura had felt earlier was now undeniable. Laura's breath caught in her throat as the weight of the situation settled on her shoulders. She knew she had to act, but the fear of what she might uncover was overwhelming. She had to know what was happening to her daughter, but she didn't know where to begin. The unsettling presence in their home had made its mark on Rebecca, and now it was making its way through the entire house, wrapping itself around Laura's every thought. Something wasn't right, and Laura felt a deep, unshakable fear that whatever it was not going away. She knew she had to find answers before it was too late. The following day, Laura made the decision to speak with the neighbors. She needed to know if anyone had noticed anything unusual recently. The tension in the air was palpable, and the sense of dread seemed to grow with each passing moment. She approached the couple next door, trying to remain calm, though the unease was evident in her voice. They had always been friendly, and she hoped they might have seen something that could explain Rebecca's behavior. As Laura spoke with them, the couple seemed hesitant at first, unsure whether they had seen anything out of the ordinary. But then, after a moment of silence, they began to share something that immediately caught Laura's attention. They mentioned a man, a figure who had been seen lingering around their property on several occasions. He was always in the shadows, never revealing his face fully, and always leaving as quickly as he had come. The man's presence was unsettling, like a shadow that didn't belong. They could not tell who he was, but they agreed that his visits had been strange. Laura's heart began to race as the pieces of the puzzle slowly started to come together. She couldn't help but feel that this man was somehow connected to Rebecca's recent behavior. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the strange drawings, the whispers, and the sense of fear that had taken over her daughter's life could all be tied to this mysterious figure. But who was he? And what did he want with Rebecca? Determined to find some answers, Laura began to dig deeper. She searched for any information she could find about men who had recently moved into the neighborhood, hoping to uncover any connection to the figure described by her neighbors. Hours passed as she sifted through records and online sources, but then she came across something that stopped her in her tracks. A name: James Carter. He had recently relocated to the area, a middle-aged man who lived alone. The brief description that followed sent a shiver down her spine. His eyes, they said, were empty, and his expression was always dark, as if something inside him had died long ago. The words seemed to echo in her mind, replaying over and over again as she felt an icy grip tighten around her chest. It was him. She was certain of it. The figure her neighbors had described, the man who had been seen in the shadows. James Carter. Something about him felt wrong, and Laura could sense that he was somehow tied to the dark energy that had begun to consume her daughter. But what was his connection to Rebecca? What was his purpose? Fear surged through her as she realized she needed to confront him. She couldn't wait any longer. She had to meet him face to face, to ask him directly what he was doing, what his intentions were. Without wasting any time, Laura grabbed her phone and dialed the number listed for James Carter. Her hand trembled as she held the phone to her ear, her heart pounding in her chest. The ringing seemed to stretch on forever, each second feeling like an eternity. But when the call went to voicemail, Laura felt a wave of dread wash over her. He didn't answer. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Why hadn't he picked up? Was he avoiding her? Was he aware that she was looking for him? A sickening feeling settled in the pit of her stomach. Laura put the phone down slowly, her hands shaking as she stared at the screen. The fear that had been building inside her since Rebecca's first strange drawing now seemed to come to a head. Something was happening, and it was happening fast. This man, this James Carter, was somehow at the center of it all, and she had to find him. She had to confront him before it was too late. The sense of urgency was overwhelming, but so was the fear. Laura knew that the answers she was searching for could very well change everything, and she was terrified of what she might discover. Laura couldn't shake the feeling that she had to confront James Carter in person. The more she thought about it, the more she realized there was no other choice. She had to face him directly, no matter how much fear gripped her. As the day drew to a close, she made up her mind. She would go to his house and get the answers she so desperately needed. When she arrived at James Carter's house, her heart raced. The house itself was dark, almost foreboding, nestled among the trees at the edge of the neighborhood. It seemed so ordinary at first glance, but there was something unsettling about the way it stood, like a silent watcher. Laura stood in front of the door for a moment, her hand trembling as she raised it to knock. She hesitated, her thoughts swirling in a storm of doubt and fear. But then, with a deep breath, she knocked. The door creaked open, and there he was. James Carter. He stood before her, tall and imposing, his eyes hollow and cold. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the silence between them thick with tension. Then, to Laura's shock, a strange, almost mocking smile curled at the corners of his lips. "You're Laura, right? I've heard about you. Rebecca is your daughter?" he asked, his voice too smooth, too soft, like syrup. It sounded rehearsed, as though he had been expecting her. Laura's insides churned. She had to remain calm, but the sight of him standing there, this man who had been lurking in the shadows of her daughter's life, sent waves of anger and fear through her. He was the one from the drawings, the dark figure that had haunted Rebecca's art, the one with the empty eyes and twisted smile. She forced herself to speak, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. "Look at this drawing," she said, pulling one of Rebecca's drawings from her bag. She unfolded it slowly, revealing the disturbing image that had been haunting her. "She's been drawing you, hasn't she?" James's eyes flickered to the drawing, and for the briefest moment his expression faltered. His eyes darted from the paper to Laura's face, his smile slowly fading as his nerves began to show. His calm demeanor cracked, replaced by an unmistakable sense of discomfort. He swallowed hard, his lips twitching. I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, his voice suddenly unsteady. His hand twitched at his side as if fighting the urge to close the door. Laura's heart raced. She had him. He knew exactly what she was talking about, and his reaction only confirmed her suspicions. But before she could say anything more, James abruptly slammed the door shut, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Laura stood frozen for a moment, staring at the door, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. He had tried to hide, tried to deny everything. But she knew now. She knew he was the one behind all of this. She wasn't about to let him get away with it. As she stood there, her eyes locked on the small gap beneath the door where a sliver of light still leaked through. Through the cracks, she could see his shadow moving inside, disappearing further into the house. Something dark, something malevolent, lurked within those walls. She could feel it, like a chill in the air that wouldn't go away. Without a second thought, Laura reached for the doorknob, testing it, but the door was locked tight. She pressed her ear to it, straining to listen. She could hear the faint rustling of movement, the sound of footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. He was there, and he was hiding from her, avoiding her. Laura stepped back, her mind racing. She knew there was more to this house, more to this man than he was letting on. He had tried to deny everything, but his fear had exposed him. The darkness she had felt creeping into her home was here, inside this man's life, inside this house. And whatever he was hiding, it was not something she was going to walk away from. She turned and walked away, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't gotten the answers she needed. This confrontation had only deepened the mystery. James had not only denied the truth, but he had also tried to shut her out. Laura realized then that this was far from over. The shadows that had been following her daughter were much deeper than she could have imagined, and James Carter was at the center of it all. As she made her way back home, a sense of dread washed over her. She had confronted him, but now she had more questions than ever. What was he hiding? What was he really doing to Rebecca? And why had he been so eager to hide behind his smile, behind his lies? The truth was still out of reach, but Laura knew one thing for sure. She was not going to stop until she uncovered it. Laura returned home, but the feeling of unease that had settled in her chest refused to leave. Despite confronting James Carter and finding fleeting answers, something inside her told her that the truth was still just out of reach. There was more to him, something he was hiding, something darker that connected him to Rebecca's drawings and the strange changes in her behavior. It didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. It felt deliberate. As the days passed, the tension in Laura's home only grew. The weight of everything that had happened seemed to press down on her, suffocating her thoughts. She tried to go about her day as usual, but her mind kept returning to James and the unsettling smile he had shown her. He had lied, and she could see it now. He had been part of something sinister, and Laura knew deep down that he hadn't just been a random figure. He was a catalyst in something that had already begun to consume her daughter. One afternoon, Laura returned to Rebecca's room, hoping to find some kind of clarity, something that would help her piece together the fragments of the mystery. As soon as she entered, she noticed it. Another drawing. This time, the house was still there. The same empty windows, the same ominous presence. But this time, there was something different. On the window of the house, there was a figure, standing tall, its eyes black and hollow, staring directly at Rebecca from within the confines of the paper. It wasn't just a sketch anymore, it was an invitation, an omen. Laura's stomach twisted as she looked at the drawing, feeling a cold shiver run down her spine. It was then that Laura decided she couldn't wait any longer. She needed to take action, to make sure that this wasn't just her imagination running wild. Her instincts told her that something was terribly wrong, and she couldn't let it go. She went to the police, hoping that they would believe her, that they would take her seriously. She explained her suspicions, told them about the mysterious man, James Carter, and how he had been lurking in the shadows of her daughter's life. But the police were skeptical. They had nothing to go on, no evidence, no concrete proof that anything had happened. To them, it sounded like the ramblings of a mother who was losing her grip on reality. They reassured her that they would keep an eye on things, but they couldn't act without something more substantial. Laura was left with nothing but their dismissive words and her growing sense of dread. The next morning, as Laura was drinking her coffee, she noticed something that sent a jolt of panic through her body. James Carter was gone. His house was empty, the windows dark and cold. There was no sign of him, no trace of where he had gone. It was as though he had vanished into thin air. Laura stood frozen for a moment, her heart racing. He had disappeared, just like that. But as the minutes ticked by, she realized that his absence was not the end. In fact, it only felt like the beginning. When Laura went back into Rebecca's room, she noticed that her daughter was sitting on her bed, staring at the wall. Her face was pale, her eyes distant, as though she had seen something that terrified her. Laura knelt beside her, and that's when Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible. "He was close, Mommy. He's not gone." Laura's heart sank as she understood. James Carter was gone, but the shadow he had cast over their lives was far from over. It was still there, lingering in the air, in the drawings, in the nightmares that had begun to plague Rebecca. She wasn't safe. None of them were. Laura stared at the drawing on Rebecca's desk, her hand trembling as she reached for it. The figure in the window, with its empty eyes, felt as though it was staring right through her, as if it knew something that Laura was too afraid to face. The nightmares were getting worse, and Rebecca's silence was growing more profound. There was something else now, something that Laura couldn't explain. It wasn't just about James anymore. It was about something deeper, something far older and more insidious. As the days turned into weeks, Laura tried to put the pieces together, but the more she uncovered, the less she understood. James Carter was gone, but the darkness he had brought with him remained. The strange events in their home, the drawings, the nightmares. None of it made sense. But one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. Rebecca was still connected to something, and Laura wasn't sure if she could save her from it. And as she sat in the dim light of Rebecca's room, looking at the haunting drawings, Laura realized that the journey ahead would be far darker than she had ever imagined. She had entered a world where nothing was as it seemed, where shadows held secrets, and where the past had a way of coming back, no matter how hard you tried to forget. The truth was still out there, and Laura knew that she would stop at nothing to uncover it. But for now, she was left with more questions than answers. And the most terrifying thing of all was that she didn't know if she was strong enough to face whatever was waiting for her at the end of the road.